So, hi. About 25 years ago, I remember walking onto my front yard. It was a kind of chilly, starless November night, and I had just come back from a run. It was dark, obviously, and inside the house was a kind of glow from the windows. My family was in there. My wife and my 3 kids, who are amazing, and they were very young. And I could hear them sort of set the table, and they were laughing and singing and talking about the day. And I just was tired. And I lay down on the grass. The grass was kind of frozen and crispy. And I lay down, and I was just thinking, there's nothing wrong here. And I noticed as I was sort of catching my breath from my run, I noticed that my breath, that mist that came out, it was sort of going up into the air, and my sweat was also kind of misting going up. And I just thought to myself, I just want to die. It would be okay if I could just disintegrate, just like this mist, and just go up into the air and not even leave an impression on the grass. And it made no sense, but there I was. And I don't really remember going back into the house and joining my family, but I must have. And I must have gotten into the routine of the evening and did the dishes and all that. And a couple, maybe a week later, at the urging of the people that I was working with, I was a college chaplain at a university, the one in Connecticut, State University. As a college chaplain, it was work that I found to integrate all of my training, all of my upbringing. I was an English major, had a kind of philosophical bent. I like to think deep thoughts. I like to build community. I like to listen to people's stories. I mean, it was a great thing to be an Episcopal priest, and I had it, and I made it, and I had a wonderful family. But I was so sick, I couldn't breathe. I kept coughing, and so my staff said, "You need to get in the car and you need to go to the doctor." And so I did. And after the doctor examined me, he said, "You have pneumonia. But I need to ask you some other questions. Are you sleeping? Are you eating?" I said, "Not really." "Do you have any libido?" I'm a bishop talking about libido. I said, "No." He said, "Do you have, are you moody?" "Yeah." Do you find yourself getting irritable?" I said, "My wife would definitely think I'm irritable." And then he asked, "Do you have any thoughts about ending your life or hurting yourself?" And I told him about this time on the grass, just wanting to sort of evaporate. But I didn't tell him about this large oak tree that I drove by every day after work, that was on a particular curve on Codfish Falls Road in Storrs, Connecticut, and how, like the sirens in the Odyssey, it would call to me in my Subaru. I didn't tell him that. And he said, "I can fix the pneumonia, but your depression frightens me. I can give you some medication, but I need you to talk to this person." And he wrote a note. And I was very lucky, privileged, because you and I all know, we all know, that there are people who didn't get that recommendation, who didn't have those resources. Just as an aside, in the past 10 days, there were 5 people whose orbit is within mine, within 15 miles of Concord, New Hampshire, who have succeeded in taking their own lives. It's in the past 10 days. So I'm very privileged. I don't go to the same therapist that doctor recommended. I go to this other guy, Dr. Schwartz, who I've been seeing now for about 25 years. And I went to see him, and he asked me the same questions, and he said the same thing: "You're very sick." Which I thought, And then he went into his pocket, and he took a card, and he wrote his cell phone number, and he said, "This is the kind of therapy that I do." He talked about psychodynamic therapy, medication. He said something about Freud. I kind of blanked out. And as he handed me his card, he said, "My treatment works. It only works if you're alive." And he handed me the card. And at that moment, I was shocked. And I was stunned. And I realized that it was important, maybe not to me at that moment, but others, that I stay alive. So here I am. I'm kind of coming out. This is my coming out party. There's a tradition in New Hampshire of Episcopal bishops coming out. My predecessor, my dear friend, Gene Robinson, who I succeeded as the bishop of the Episcopal Church of New Hampshire, was actually consecrated bishop at the University of New Hampshire at the hockey rink.
Don't get that messed up.
I'm sorry, New Hampshire, 15 years ago this November. He was the first open homosexual to be ordained to the episcopate in Christianity. He was at that consecration in his chasuble, and underneath his chasuble, he had to wear a bulletproof vest. So I have tremendous admiration for my brother Gene and my friend. And I also think, Gene, I think about Gene and him coming out, and I think, well, maybe I'm coming out and I can say, I'm not gay. I'm depressed. And I don't know what's harder, but here I am. I'm grateful for Christians, and especially Christian leaders, there's a kind of popular understanding that we're supposed to be happy. We're supposed to point to joy. We might be the ones that other people come to because they're feeling bad, but we, we're at people's gravesides. We get to bury beloved people. We get to bury despised people. We get to go into homes that are broken by all sorts of strife, by addiction, abuse. And in the meantime, our own families might look more like a Hieronymus Bosch tableau than a Norman Rockwell tableau. And that we face all this. But I thought it was important for me to share this story because more and more clergy who I've shared this in very small ways have come to me and they've talked about their own battles and their own struggles. And this is real, as you know. I am so privileged, as I said, I'm in many ways like a NASCAR driver. Not that I really like a NASCAR, but, I get this incredible crew of support. I have a therapist, I have a spiritual director, I have a coach, I've got a staff that love me, or at least they say they do. And we get to sort of, and they hear me sigh a lot, and they sometimes say, "What can we do? Tell us about it." Not everyone gets that. But as we've learned, that the power of sharing these stories is liberating, it's life-giving. When we share about our own anxieties and our fears, something of the burden of that is lessened. I saw a story that I'm going to tell very briefly. I didn't hear the story because it couldn't be told, but I saw it. I was walking in the woods recently, and there was this stone wall in the woods. There was a kind of abandoned old farmer's road, like maybe a logging road. This is outside of Concord. And along trees. And I noticed that there was these shards, these little lengths of broken, rusted barbed wire. And the barbed wire had been placed there when these trees were younger. And the trees were used to kind of attach the barbed wire to, maybe to keep sheep in or cows or something. But the trees had grown tall and stately and magnificent. But the barbed wire had irritated the bark and caused some wound in the flesh of the tree. And the barbed wire had actually gotten subsumed and fully integrated into the tree. And it was so deep in the tree that it was sort of in the vascular system of the tree. And yet the tree was wounded, but it was flourishing. The brilliant red was just amazing this year. And the same trees could be used to bring sap for maple sugar. I want to be that tree. I have barbed wire in my soul, and how I got it, where I got it, that's a whole other story that'll take much more than 12 minutes to get to. And there are probably lots of influences around that. But I ache. I'm alive. I'm still alive. And I so achingly want you to be alive too. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Hirschfeld, for your vulnerability, courage for sharing tonight. I sincerely hope that we're moving into an age where we can trust all the more and respect all the more leaders who are honest about who they are, where they have been, and how they've processed, because I think you have much more strength and wisdom to share as a result.
Thanks.
Thank you. Questions for Bishop Hirschfeld?
Can you tell me about your fascination with picking up large rocks?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've actually done some writing about this depression, and I discovered that because I spent some time out in the woods. When I was really in the throes of a depressive episode, I felt as though there are things that are just immovable. In New Hampshire, we have these things called glacial erratics. You know what glacial erratic is? It's a huge boulder that's been left by a glacier, and the woods are strewn with them. I don't move those. But I noticed that if I go to the gym and I just do a few bench presses or some pulls or something, just the fact of moving something means that there's something in me that can be moved too. And so sometimes when I can't get to the gym, I just go out in the woods and my brother calls it humping rocks. It helps. It's therapy. It's almost as good as Celexa. But I need both. Yeah.